When 5 Russian heavy military transport aircraft landed in Tehran within just a few days, each one carefully avoiding NATO airspace, this was no longer a case of routine military cooperation. It was the sign of a door to war slowly closing. Russia is racing to supply weapons to Iran. China is quietly reinforcing its air defense systems. Meanwhile, a U.S. aircraft carrier strike group has moved into position, ready to strike. The question is no longer if there will be war, but rather, who is preparing for the worst-case scenario, and why? If you want to understand what's truly unfolding behind diplomatic statements and short news flashes, stay with us until the end of this video. And if you care about deep, deliberate geopolitical analysis that gets to the core of the matter, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the silent chess games shaping our world. The world rarely steps into war with the kind of noisy, dramatic moment people expect. There are no solemn declarations, no red-letter days marked in history. War, in many cases, begins with movements that are small, cold, and quiet. A night flight with no press release. An old air corridor suddenly reactivated after years of silence. A carrier strike group quietly shifting course without explanation or fanfare. And then, in just a matter of days, the entire heartbeat of the Middle East begins to change. What's happening around Iran in early 2026 no longer resembles the usual cycle of tensions. This isn't one of those familiar displays of force where sides growl, bluff, then retreat to their corners. This time, the puzzle pieces are appearing too quickly, too synchronously, and too decisively. The speed of action has far outpaced the tempo of diplomacy. The scale of deployment has moved well beyond symbolic deterrence. And, most crucially, the level of coordination among global powers suggests a dangerous assumption is quietly being accepted. That war is no longer a distant scenario, but a real possibility that must be prepared for now. The U.S. has moved the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group into position, accompanied by rare, hardline signals from Washington. Russia has openly reaffirmed its support for Iran, without hedging, without ambiguity. China maintains its cautious diplomatic tone, but its actions on the ground speak a very different rhythm. All 3 powers are focused on Tehran, but not with the same concerns, and not for the same reasons. For the US, Iran is a problem that must be contained before it spins out of control. For Russia and China, Iran is a frontline defense, a strategic anchor they cannot afford to see collapse too quickly. At this point, the core issue is no longer the familiar question. Will the U.S. attack Iran? The far more dangerous question lies just behind it. If Washington does act, what kind of Iran will it be facing? And this is where the pace of Russian and Chinese moves becomes truly alarming. Not the words spoken at summits, but the weapons, the technology, the defensive capabilities being pumped into Iran with the urgency of an emergency operation. Each passing day shifts the balance of risk. Each shipment that arrives erects a new layer of defense, rendering old attack plans obsolete. When the first signals began appearing on aviation radar, when strange new flight paths were activated, when heavy transport planes repeatedly landed under cover of night, the picture began to take shape. This was no longer political support. This was the machinery of war logistics being set in motion, quietly, but unmistakably. And from that moment on, the game entered a new phase, where war may not have erupted yet, but everything is being prepared as if it could at any moment. That's why to understand how close the world stands to the brink, you can't begin with bold declarations or tough speeches. You have to start with the things that never lie. The flights, the routes, and the cold, hard numbers of military logistics. And that story, in the early days of 2026, began very clearly with one name, the IL-76. In military analysis, there's a rule that almost never fails. Declarations may be vague, intentions can be hidden, but logistics never lie. A plan can be concealed at the negotiating table, but it's nearly impossible to hide a campaign once the wheels are in motion. And what's unfolding in Iran's skies in early 2026 bears all the hallmarks of a wartime logistics machine being activated, not symbolic visits or routine technical cooperation. In just a short span of time, a wave of heavy IL-76 flights landed in Tehran, one after another. Not isolated trips, not a spaced-out schedule designed to avoid attention, but multiple sorties, closely timed, tightly packed into the same flight windows and following nearly identical routes. This is the classic pattern of emergency resupply, where time outweighs all concerns about appearances or diplomatic fallout. Each flight is a puzzle piece, and when you put them together, the picture becomes unmistakable. A defensive capacity is being rapidly reinforced, as if someone believes the countdown has already begun. The IL-76 is not the kind of aircraft used to send soft messages. It was built to carry the heaviest and most dangerous cargo: large-scale radars, missile launchers, air defense components, equipment whose mere presence can alter how an adversary calculates risk. With a payload of dozens of tons per flight, just a few landings are enough to inject into Iran a volume of hardware capable of reshaping its defense posture at critical points. This is not gradual reinforcement. This is instant compensation, the kind that only appears when there's a real belief that a strike could come very soon. The flight path of those IL-76s speaks louder than even the number of sorties. Completely avoiding NATO airspace, rerouting through tightly monitored corridors in the Caucasus, this was not the whim of a pilot or the routine decision of a transport company. It was a pre-planned route, held in reserve for scenarios where every hour of delay could cost lives or cause a strategic collapse. When such infrastructure is activated, it sends a clear message. The worst-case scenarios are no longer theoretical. They're on the table. The appearance of aircraft bearing Belarusian registration adds a colder edge to the picture. This is a familiar political veil in sensitive operations, where real control lies in Moscow, but legal fingerprints are scattered to reduce the chance of direct confrontation. It's how a major power operates when it's mastered the art of staying below the threshold of overt war, where every move is measured between speed, efficiency, and plausible deniability. And it's at this point that the IL-76 takes on a meaning beyond that of a mere transport aircraft. It becomes a signal that Iran is no longer being prepared for some distant confrontation, but for a dangerous phase that's drawing very near. Once the logistics engine starts running, there's little room left for minor adjustments or easy retreats. Whether war actually breaks out or not, the gears have engaged and their momentum is hard to stop. But the deeper we look into these flights, the more unsettling meanings emerge. What's being delivered to Iran isn't just intended to help Tehran endure an outside strike. Alongside the stream of weapons and equipment, other signals begin to surface, subtler, colder, hinting that Moscow is preparing for more than one scenario, not just to defend the capital, but for the day the capital may no longer be safe. From here, the story no longer ends with IL-76s in the sky. It unfolds into a two-pronged strategy by Russia, where arming Iran and preparing for a post-Tehran future are happening simultaneously in the same strategic breath. What truly sends a chill down the spine of observers isn't that Russia is accelerating its armament of Iran. It's the cold, calculated logic behind how Moscow is doing it. Because alongside the flights carrying military equipment and the silent activation of defense contracts, entirely different signals are emerging: the movement of assets, the opening of financial channels, and whispered talks in diplomatic circles about orderly withdrawal scenarios. These are not the actions of an ally confident in its partner's endurance. These are the moves of a major power preparing for every outcome, including the worst. Russia understands Iran far better than the West often gives it credit for. It doesn't just see a besieged nation. It sees a regime under multi-layered pressure: prolonged sanctions, a strained economy, simmering social unrest, and the looming threat of external attack. In that context, arming Iran isn't simply about helping an ally stand up to the United States. It's about extending the life of a strategic link just long enough to serve Russia's own interests. To Moscow, Iran is not an ideological symbol. It's a practical pillar. Tehran plays a crucial role in the military supply chain that sustains Russia's war machine in Ukraine. Ammunition, drones, components, all are tied to an Iran that remains intact. That's why Russia cannot afford to let Iran fall quickly. But having witnessed too many sudden collapses in modern history, Moscow will never stake its future on the survival of a single regime. This is where the two-faced game begins to reveal itself. On one side, Russia is injecting weapons, technology, and defensive capabilities into Iran with urgent speed, as if each day might be the last before a major strike. On the other, it is quietly preparing to safeguard its interests in the event that Tehran cannot hold. Reports of gold and assets flowing out of Iran, now openly referenced by Western intelligence, are no side note. In the world of strategic planning, asset protection is one of the earliest indicators of a regime's projected viability. This cold-blooded approach is not betrayal. It's the survival instinct of a power that's seen too many allies fall in an instant. Russia doesn't believe in unconditional commitments nor in impregnable fortresses. It believes in buying time, raising the cost, and ensuring that every choice made by its adversary comes with pain. For Washington, that means denying the possibility of a quick, clean, low-cost victory. For Tehran, it means being given a chance to resist, but not a guaranteed future. It's this duality, arming Iran while preparing for a post-capital scenario, that has reshaped the very nature of the crisis. It shows that Russia is not merely reacting to the threat of a U.S. attack. It is actively shaping the battlefield. Every air defense unit deployed, every radar system activated, doesn't just protect Iran, it buys time for Moscow, time to adjust its strategy in Ukraine, time to reposition resources, and time to force the West to divide its focus. In that logic, Iran doesn't need to win. It just needs not to lose too fast. And to achieve that, Russia knows ground weapons, whether above or below the surface, won't be enough. If this war begins, it will begin in the skies. Airspace control will determine the tempo, the level of escalation, and the conflict's duration. This is the nexus where all logistical planning and asset preservation converge. Because once Moscow has prepared for both a standing Iran and a shaking Tehran, the next question is no longer, should we send weapons? But what can we send that changes the rules of the game? And among all the options, nothing offers greater strategic insurance than giving Iran the ability to fight and survive in its own skies. From this point forward, the story no longer revolves around transport planes or discrete asset flows. It sharpens into a single, colder name, the Su-35, the insurance policy over Iran's airspace. In every modern war, there exists an invisible but decisive threshold, the moment the sky no longer belongs to the attacker. And it's precisely at that threshold where the name Su-35 takes on a meaning far beyond a typical arms deal. As reports of Iran receiving Su-35s gradually surface, the most important detail isn't the number of jets or the delivery timeline. It's the strategic message Moscow is sending. If war breaks out, Iran will no longer face strikes from above in a state of helplessness like it once did. To Iran, the Su-35 is not just a newer generation fighter compared to the aging airframes it has been operating. It represents a qualitative leap in air defense thinking. For decades, Iran's airspace has been a vulnerable zone, where every U.S. or Israeli strike scenario presumed rapid air superiority. The Su-35 disrupts that assumption. With its long-range radar, beyond visual range combat capabilities, and high maneuverability, it forces adversaries to confront the real risk of aerial dogfights, not just low-risk hit-and-run missions. But the deeper significance lies in how Russia is using the Su-35 as a form of strategic insurance. Moscow knows it doesn't need to turn Iran into an air power equal to the United States. It just needs to raise the cost of any attack high enough to make Washington hesitate. Every Su-35 that takes off carries more than just missiles. It carries the potential to disrupt the tempo of enemy operations. Every potential sortie forces the U.S. to bring more escorts, more electronic warfare assets, and longer prep time. And in modern warfare, time is the most expensive commodity. The Su-35 also carries a powerful psychological weight. It signals that Iran is no longer alone in the most decisive strategic domain, its skies. For Tehran's leadership, the presence of an advanced fighter platform creates a sense of "we can hold out," helping to reinforce internal confidence in moments of maximum tension. For Iranian society, however tightly information is controlled, the sight of new jets in the sky serves as a reassurance, slowing down panic and uncertainty in the face of looming war. From Russia's perspective, the Su-35 is also a reminder that Moscow remains an irreplaceable provider of security in moments of crisis. At a time when the West is working to isolate Russia on every front, delivering the Su-35 to Iran is a declaration that it still holds the power to shape outcomes in global flashpoints. It's a message to other partners as well. In your most dangerous hour, Russia will act, not just speak. And yet, this is where the limitations of the Su-35 also begin to surface. No matter how powerful, a fighter jet is still a finite asset, reliant on runways, logistics, and its survivability against a first strike. If Iran's skies are defended only by a few swords, they can still be broken, given enough time. Russia knows this better than anyone, which is why the Su-35 was never designed to stand alone. Its role as insurance only truly works when embedded within a larger air defense ecosystem. This is where Russia's strategic thinking begins to converge with Beijing's. If the Su-35 is the maneuverable layer of insurance, Iran still needs something else: a dense air defense network capable of turning its airspace into a high-risk zone from the very first minute. A zone where the enemy cannot easily open paths, cannot quickly neutralize threats, and cannot avoid losses. The arrival of modern fighters is just the tip of the iceberg. The submerged and far more dangerous part lies in the ground-based air defense systems quietly being installed. And right there, the story of the Su-35 naturally opens into a darker, heavier chapter. Because when the sky is not just filled with planes but shielded by layered defenses, air war ceases to be a technological showcase. It becomes a grinding, attritional battle where every inch forward comes at a price. That's when the S-400 and HQ-9 enter the scene, and the sky over Iran begins to take the shape of a true fortress. There comes a moment in military thinking when air war stops being a story of speed and technology and becomes a story of endurance. That moment arrives when the sky is no longer open space, but fractured, locked down, and turned into a high-risk zone from the very first minute. For Iran, that moment is marked by two names, the S-400 and the HQ-9, not as political symbols, but as foundational stones of a quietly rising air defense fortress. If the Su-35 is the agile layer, the maneuverable insurance policy that can adapt to shifting circumstances, then the S-400 and HQ-9 are the static components, heavier, quieter, and far more intimidating. They don't need to posture. Their mere presence is enough to force adversaries to rethink entire campaigns. The S-400 is not designed to shoot down a few targets. It's built to fracture an assault from the very beginning, to buy time, erode momentum, and make any opening strike so costly that it's no longer acceptable. When paired with the HQ-9, Iran's air defense picture stops being a patchwork and starts becoming a multi-layered network, where long, medium, and short-range systems overlap. Each layer doesn't just protect itself, it shields the others. This is every planner's nightmare when drafting a first strike scenario, because it breaks the core assumption of modern warfare that air superiority can be achieved quickly and cleanly. For the US and Israel, this means the era of fast, clean, precise strikes is over. Every air defense target must now be located, suppressed, and destroyed, step by step. Each step demands more aircraft, more missiles, more electronic warfare assets, and more time. And the longer it drags on, the greater the risk, not just militarily, but politically. Public images of damage, the threat of escalation, and the danger of dragging the entire region into an uncontrollable spiral. That's why the S-400 and HQ-9 do more than protect Iran. They change how the entire Middle East must think about war. A sky densely defended means that any attack becomes a life-or-death decision. There's no longer space for limited tests or half-measure warnings. Once the decision is made, the cost will be clear from day one. From the perspective of Russia and China, turning Iran's airspace into a fortress isn't about ensuring Tehran's absolute victory. The true goal is to make war, if it happens, a grinding conflict neither side can walk away from easily. It's about extending Iran's ability to endure and pulling the US into a far more difficult equation than it has faced elsewhere in the region. But the higher the outer walls are built, the clearer a strategic paradox becomes. No fortress holds meaning if its core begins to crack. Russia knows this, China knows this, and Iran's leadership knows it better than anyone. History has shown many regimes don't fall because of bombs from above, but from internal pressure peaking at the exact moment they're forced to defend against an outside threat. As the skies grow increasingly locked down with radar and missiles, the center of gravity for national security begins to shift, downward then deeper, into the heart of society. New questions emerge. How do you control a population in crisis? How do you prevent unrest from spreading as a war drags on? How do you protect the regime from the fractures created by the pressure of war itself? At that intersection, air defense alone can no longer explain the whole picture. When the outside is wrapped in steel, the greatest fear turns inward. And it's from this point that the appearance of systems like the Mi-28 and increasingly hardened internal security measures reveal a starker truth. Iran is not only preparing to withstand attacks from the US, but also bracing for the possibility of collapse from within its own society. Once the dense layers of air defense have been raised in the sky, once every scenario involving missiles and airstrikes has been calculated to the finest detail, the most dangerous threat Tehran faces no longer lies beyond its borders. Modern history has repeated a ruthless lesson. Many regimes don't collapse under enemy fire, but because their own societies can no longer endure the strain of prolonged war. And Iran is now stepping directly into that dangerous gray zone. In this context, the appearance of the Mi-28 in the picture of military aid carries a meaning entirely different from that of the Su-35 or the S-400. This is not a weapon designed for high-altitude dogfights or radar versus missile chess matches. The Mi-28 is built for ground control, for flying low, for seeing every street, every neighborhood, every flashpoint where unrest might erupt. It is a tool of internal security during wartime, where the line between confronting external enemies and suppressing internal disorder becomes increasingly blurred. Russia understands all too well that a bombed Iran may still survive, but an Iran under attack from both outside and within is on perilously thin ground. In recent years, waves of protests, economic grievances, and social tensions have revealed that Iran's internal foundation is far less stable than the official image Tehran projects. If war breaks out, all of those cracks will be amplified at a pace no one can control. The Mi-28, along with systems for electronic surveillance, urban control, and riot suppression, reflects a very clear priority: to keep internal order from collapsing before enemy bombs even get the chance. This is the survival logic of a regime placed on high alert. When the economy is strangled, when infrastructure is threatened, and when the fear of war begins to seep into daily life, the greatest danger is no longer bombers overhead, but chaos in the streets. In such a scenario, strengthening internal security is no longer a choice, it's an instinct. And Russia is no stranger to this mindset. It has watched allied regimes fall not because they lost militarily, but because they failed to contain the backlash when crises dragged on too long. That's why arming Iran is not just about giving Tehran the means to strike back, it's about giving it the tools to politically survive. But it is precisely here that the greatest paradox emerges. The tighter the internal security grip, the more pressure builds within society. The more a regime prepares for suppression, the more clearly it reveals its own fear of collapse. Mi-28s flying low over city centers aren't just symbols of power, they are signs of deep anxiety. They reveal that Tehran no longer believes defeating the external enemy alone will be enough. And when a nation must simultaneously build a fortress in the sky, tighten control on the ground, and brace for upheaval from within its own people, it points to a cold truth. The most dangerous war Iran faces may not come from Washington or Tel Aviv, but from the question of whether this regime can truly withstand the storm that war will unleash from inside its own walls. When we connect the dots of everything that has happened and is still unfolding, a cold, undeniable conclusion begins to emerge. The world has entered a pre-war state, whether or not the first shot is ever fired. The strategic gears are already in motion, logistics have been activated, weapons are in place, and the worst-case scenarios are no longer just academic hypotheticals. Russia and China have wagered that Iran must hold long enough to make any offensive strike a gamble with no guaranteed win. On the other side, the US now faces one of its most difficult strategic decisions in years. A rapid military strike might offer short-term tactical advantage, but the price is no longer confined within Iran's borders. It spills over into global energy markets, into vital shipping routes, and into the delicate security balance of the entire Middle East. Choosing not to strike, however, means accepting an Iran that is better armored, more confident, and part of a regional order where the threshold for force has been raised higher than ever before. Neither option is easy, and it's that very difficulty that makes each passing hour feel heavier. The number 72 hours is not a prophecy. It's a symbol of the speed at which the world is now moving. One incident, one miscalculation, or one decision driven more by politics than military logic could flip the entire board. What today is merely a transport flight, a defense contract, or a firm statement could tomorrow become the opening move of a confrontation no one will be able to fully control. In this evolving picture, Iran is no longer just a besieged state. It has become the focal point of deeper global anxieties, fears over the unraveling of the old order, the limits of military dominance, and the willingness of major powers to accept greater risk in defense of their interests. Russia and China may not want war, but they are willing to live with the risk of it if it helps reshape the balance of power. The US may not want to strike, but neither can it withdraw without leaving behind a dangerous strategic vacuum. And so, in this tense and uneasy silence, the world waits. Waits for a decision, a signal, or a single move that could push everything off its familiar path. No one is truly on the sidelines anymore, not even nations that seem far removed from the Middle East. What scenario do you see taking shape? Is deterrence strong enough to hold back war? Or have we already come too close to a point of no return? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Every perspective helps bring this picture into sharper focus. And if you want to keep following deep, slow, and straight to the core analyses of the geopolitical shifts reshaping our world, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us for the stories to come.